Well, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Darren. Looking forward to having a chat.
You want to start just by giving us a little bit of background around how you got into business and into property in general, from going back to the start, I guess. Just
Yeah,
a bit of
look,
an overview.
I suppose early on, I'm a Perth boy, and Dad was plumbing contractor running his own business, and Mum owned a few properties in WA in Perth, and I wasn't the best student. I had other things that took my interest as a young fella, and I really thought that my pathway would be, through that plumbing trade and running that plumbing business. And 15 years of age, working in 40-degree heat, digging trenches. Dad managed to put paid to that pretty quick.
Yep.
You finish uni and you think, well, finish schooling here, what am I going to do? And, my thoughts just naturally went through to business and property. So I enrolled in a course at what was then Waite, which became Curtin University, and that was in valuation, which I confess I hated the course. Study for a 17-year-old lad with interests that ranged from some sporting to outdoor and it didn't seem to really have a huge point to it. But I was determined to finish it. I was going to get that degree,
Yeah.
and then I landed a job with a fairly progressive commercial firm focused on mainly retail, and I just loved it. It was definitely me. And from there, final year of study became very easy. I suddenly started getting very good marks, became engrossed in what was pretty clearly an industry that really suited me. And that's how I got involved. Don't regret that, and love the industry. And if I can do anything from here on in, one of the things I really hope to do is to encourage other people to take up the profession, because it really is a profession that you can enjoy, do well at. It's got great variety, and it needs good people. So
and in terms of when you started your business, how long ago did you start your business?
Well, look, the truth is I knew pretty much immediately that I got involved with real estate, and I got involved with the company that I was involved with, that I wanted to run a real estate business. It was so clear. I just looked around at the people around me, and the two guys that ran the business were the ones calling the shots. They were the ones that were driving the best car. They were the ones that had the big smiles on their face. And I'm thinking, well, that's where I'm going. So it was never something that I wasn't going to do. I had a father that worked and ran his own business. That was me. That was going to be that guy. I first started out in business in the mid-90s, and I followed a trajectory. I'd come back to Perth, and I'll run through that journey with you separately. And I started my business then. We had a few family matters which caused me to stop that. And but it was always something I was going to do. So we started Sullivan Property Consultants second time round in 2010, probably a bit later than what I should have, but got going in 2010. And that was a return to grassroots, really. That was a wanting to focus on just controlling my own destiny. I didn't want to have a huge number of staff around me anymore. I just wanted to do the things that I wanted to do. So that was basically in 2010. It was a refining down of the things I wanted to do in life to a smaller core, and doing that core really well. So I've been running Sullivan Property Consultants now for obviously since 2010. We're a property syndication business. We also manage property. We don't try to be all things to all people. We effectively go about trying to pick reasonable purchases in the commercial area, try to time those purchases, and we manage assets for those people that invest with us. We also manage their other assets. We don't run about anymore trying to sell assets for people we don't have a long-term business relationship with, or lease property that we don't have a long-term business relationship with. Trying to develop long-term relationship with people who want to invest in our trusts and syndicates. So that's a focus. And my focus is on making money through my investment in those trusts and syndicates, as opposed to making money through the formation of those trusts and syndicates. And it's a fairly clear delineation between where I've headed and what the market traditionally does. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a property syndicator making money through the creation of his trusts and syndicates, but that's not my focus. My focus is a different way of life. My focus is on building cash flow through the actual investments in the asset.
Yeah. So you're a significant investor in all these trusts that you put together as well, right?
Yeah, I am. Look, started out that I wasn't, and that was only through because of ability to do so. But the other thing that became pretty apparent through the course of my particularly early life was I got to the point where I'll go back a bit. So by about the early 90s, I was now in investment sales. I was running departments for the commercial blokes. And at that stage, it was fairly difficult to sell an asset in person around Australia generally. And some of the main acquisitions were being done by property syndicators. Now, being the guy who was responsible for selling the assets or working with the director who had the responsibility, my role became putting together all of that information for these property syndicators. And a lot of that became, in those days, putting together those cash flows. And as you got your sights set on being the next managing director of the company, and you're going to run your own real estate company, and you're watching your bosses who you've admired for years and worked with, and in swans this new breed of guy who waltzes past the reception into your office and sits down with you and directs you to do 10 different cash flows and has a great smile on his face and drives a bigger car than your boss and is decidedly happier than your boss and doesn't walk into the office at 6 a.m. stressed, insisting that you have things ready for him by 6 the following morning. And I'm going, these guys have got it right. And you're doing these cash flows and you're going, hang on, these guys are setting up passive income for themselves that, my God. And it became pretty apparent that this is where I want to be. I want to be the guy who owns these assets, not the one that manages them and sells them and leases them for the other bloke, because it's the other bloke that's making the most money out of this comp. And we're competing against 10 other agents, all who will do the same thing, all who will do it pretty well, and all who will compete on fee. Yet this bloke sits there, picks the best one, manages the asset, runs the syndicate. How do I do that? And that became pretty pivotal. And so that's what we're trying to do now. Now we're trying to say, well, I want my money to come from the investment in the vehicle, not from the management of the vehicle. And so, we've built to the stage now where we're moving forward, looking to be hopefully the largest investor in our trusts and syndicates. And that might only be a 10 or 20% investment in each one, but that's pretty substantial. And we're there now. So, it's been a long journey, but we're there. We're not a big syndicator, but we're looking to grow. And I've been quite wary of purchasing up until now, but I do think there might be some purchasing opportunities that will present themselves between 23 and 25. We're positioned to be able to take advantage of that. And that's through good management. That's through not necessarily acquiring everything across our desk. And, that's through improving the value of the assets which we've had under management. So that's where we're at today.
Where's your main area of focus in terms of types of properties in the last few years, Brian? And has that changed recently as things have changed in the world, I guess?
Definitely has changed. I started out, the first time I ventured into this vehicle, it was a vehicle that I'd set up and I'd formed it. It was about 99 and formed it with partners. And that was the start of my syndication business, if you like. And the main interesting property at that stage was industrial. And so from 2000 through to 2007, we really focused on that industrial sector. And at that stage, focusing on industrial made sense to me. Industrial yields were running at somewhere between 8 and 12%. I know that's a big band, but I'm talking about a long period of time. And the retail office environment was at least 2 to 3% under that. So, you know, the asset price, to those that don't follow that thinking, what I'm saying is your return on your asset was 2 or 3% more if you're in an industrial area than it was if you were buying an office or retail property. So that was a big variance, and it made sense to me to pick the eye teeth out of an industrial market, because traditionally it was a very separate market to the commercial market. And by that, I mean your industrial buyers were quite known. They were quite, you know, you bought industrial or you didn't. It wasn't really regarded as an investment vehicle, but I felt many of these assets were clearly investment quality tenants. And so we went quite heavily in the industrial market through that period. But in around about 2007 to 2010, by then it had changed quite substantially. If you look at that asset class today, I was looking at an asset sale most recently in the industrial sector, which was between 5 and 6% yield. Well, I can buy a shopping centre for that yield. I can buy a bulky goods centre for that yield. I can buy an office for substantially greater than that yield. So I have no interest in that particular sector, although it has shown good, strong growth for a long period of time. But the weaknesses of industrial, which remain big acquisitions, single tenant, you know, and a large amount of land available to be converted to industrial, remain the same. So I fail to see why there shouldn't be some form of discount on those assets over the other asset classes. So my interest moved in around about 2010 to this category, which we called at that stage bulky goods.
Right.
And the reason I liked that category was I looked, it's basically retail on a main road that directly fronts out to the road. So if you're a large format retailer, you were making that move from having 20 different small shops in retail shopping centres paying $500 a square metre for your land, for your rent, to having one larger presence in a main road with parking out the front paying $100 a square metre for your rent. The rents weren't a lot different to industrial rents. And I thought, well, this makes sense. This category makes complete sense. And the yields on those assets, again, were 10 to 12%, which was a clear 2% above comparable yields for retail and even industrial. So made that move in 2010, and probably the one regret I have is that I haven't bought more, because I think that that category has changed substantially. It's now a category of choice. It's where it should sit, I believe, because you've got assets that, you know, have main road frontage, have good parking, you know, have a quality of tenant, which you don't generally get if you're talking about smaller tenants, and have a range of tenants. So each asset's got between, you know, 6 and 12 tenants generally. So your income's coming from a variety of sources.
Yeah.
Your rents are quite predictable. The main retailers understand what their rents and outgoing commitments need to be. The landlords understand what they need to be. So there's less argy-bargy. You're normally talking with a calibre of tenant that I can relate to, you can relate to. I like the category, I still do. And we'll continue to look at that category. The other category that's taken great interest for me over that same period is the retail category. I think that's now getting to the stage where you can look to buy. There are some rents in retail reset relatively quickly related to the rest of the commercial market. Those rents have reset substantially since COVID. You can now look at a retail centre with some certainty that the income it's producing is the income it's going to produce moving forward. And there's now an understanding of the number of tenants that you can afford to hang off of a supermarket. So it's understandable. I like things which are understandable. Yeah. So the last acquisitions we've made, or the acquisition before that, we were very interested in childcare. I loved the category. Could see it moving forward as a growth category. Both governments support the category. Society generally is moving that way. But if you look at what happened, so we bought one childcare centre in 2021, around about that period. And I had 18 on my books to look at buying, and the yields we bought at a 6.5% return with some excess land. So you're talking a 7% return on the property itself with the excess land. Those yields fell to 4.25%.
Yeah, right.
The rents went from And in childcare, you're talking about a very specialised sort of a usage. So that when the operators talk, they talk about rents per head of child. So those rents went from $2,000 to $3,200 per child per year. So there's a massive increase. And I looked, by the time I got to the stage where we were getting competitive on the next asset, I'd missed 3 because the prices paid were just well beyond what I thought was reasonable for the assets. So there's a category I completely adored and simply missed because of the, I suppose, lunacy from my point of view in terms of acquisition prices between that 20 and 22 period.
And that's just markets moving so quickly on something.
Suddenly markets move quicker than what I realised they could. And a realisation that I'm not prepared to meet those market expectations.
Yeah.
If you
it's
want
like
to pay,
you're right.
Yeah, if you want to pay 4% for a real estate asset because interest rates are 2%, well, interest rates aren't always going to be 2%.
Yeah.
I couldn't see how they'd remain at 2%. It just seemed ludicrous to me. Why would you want to have an asset which is increasing at 3% per annum, which is generally speaking what the childcare is fixed, in an environment that in 2 or 3 years' time could potentially have CPI at 5 to 10% and interest rates at 5? It just didn't make sense to me, so I didn't do it.
What are you seeing anything now with interest rates starting to that is changing your view, or what your view has been is starting to evolve because of that change in interest rates? Because it's been quite an aggressive move in rates, which to me made sense. But I mean, when you've got the Reserve Bank chairman saying they're not going to move till 2024, and people, hang on to that until it's clear that that's not going to be the case, it catches some people off guard. How have you sort of seen that playing out in the property market?
Look, I expect it's more moving to what I thought would occur, as opposed to, I was actually surprised by that announcement that there would be no. It didn't make sense to me.
No.
Did I expect they'd move as quickly given that announcement? No. But I'd felt for some time that if and I'm not begrudging or saying that the money shouldn't have been spent after COVID, but clearly, and even before, clearly we had an extremely low inflationary interest rate environment. I didn't see how that was possibly sustainable, particularly when you had the amount of government expenditure that went on after COVID. You can't throw that amount of money at an economy and not have interest increases, inflation increases. So I more expected this. I've expected it for a little bit. I expected it to occur a little bit earlier. Nobody knew the real effects of COVID, how strong they'd be. The way we've rebounded here as an economy just amazes me. It's probably a little bit stronger than what I thought. But I still stick to my guns as to where I believe things were going to head. And therefore, I didn't feel at all at ease buying assets in the 4 and 5% yield mark. So my last acquisition was July 21, and it was a rundown old shopping centre that I felt I could improve. And regardless of where rates and interest go, it was about adding value to a rundown old site. And sort of that becomes a slightly different equation. We're in the midst of that now, and I'm quite enjoying working through it, but it's not easy. And we'll add value to that. And the whole process was, let's buy this site, let's add value to the site. Let's create what we purchased as a high risk income, therefore at a higher yield. And let's create that safe income that the market really desires. And then we've added value. And so that's where we're headed, and that's where we've been headed. And that's why I say 23 to 25. I still think it takes more time for change and effect to flow through to a commercial market than it does to the economy generally, and to the stock market, for instance.
And you're talking, when you're saying 23, 25, that range in terms of when property is going to be more attractive to buy. Either you've got rents going higher, or you've got property prices pulling back, or maybe a bit of both, in your view.
Correct. In my view, it'll be a bit of both. And then you'll get to a situation at some point in the cycle, and I'm not a believer that you can pick cycles, but you try not to bet against the trend, and it's
Yeah.
better to bet with the trend. There'll come some point in time when property as an investment house generally performs well in inflationary environment because it's a hedge against inflation.
Yep.
If you've bought assets where your rents can increase, i.e. they're not tied to some artificial percentage, then you're in a situation where you can enjoy it. But your yields, if they're 4 and 5%, you don't need to be Einstein to grab a calculator and pop in 100,000 and divide that by 0.04 and then pop the same number in and divide it by 0.06, and there's quite a differential. So those yields need to be reflected, and those yields are a reflection of demand, and that demand will wane a little bit as the economy perhaps isn't performing as well as what it has been today. So it'll be a combination of both, and I think that 2023 to 25 period will be when you'll start to see opportunities that arise that make sense again, and you'll go, well, hang on, this makes sense. We think we can get our desired rate of returns, and they'll move forward positively. We've tried to position ourselves so that our trusts are relatively low in debt. I know that went against taking advantage of the low interest rates, but I wasn't convinced that will always be the case. And we haven't bought a lot. We've held back. We'd like to be buying at 10 to 15 mil a year. Well, we've done nowhere near that for probably the last 3 or 4 years. Last acquisition, July 21, 7 mil. So we're keeping quite subdued into the amount of money we've been putting into the market.
With a view to that next phase is where you're going to get a lot of opportunity. And possibly when things go the other way, like they do both ways, things overshoot, right? So
they always go too far one way.
So you're going to have a really good opportunity to load up, if you like, in terms of you can buy whatever you want to be able to buy. It would be the theory.
In theory, yes. Look, and you've got to make yourself available to actually go over those opportunities too. When you're a large organisation, you probably look at it differently. But from my point of view, I've always felt that I'd let the market determine where my activities need to be directed, as opposed to trying to force the beast. So we have no requirement from a fund to have X $1 million purchased each year to keep our beast performing. It doesn't matter. I can sit there on my management fees quite happily and go, I'm making a good living, I'm doing well, I've got my assets under control, and divert my direction to improving the value of those assets. And when the time comes to buy, I can divert my attention there. I prefer to work that way in everything I do. I just don't see a point in banging your head against a brick wall trying to create something to feed a beast.
For the sake of creating it. So in terms of, as you've built the business, obviously you've got to be patient as you do this. But what would you say your greatest strength has been in business, and how does it help you?
Oh, look, I'm pretty diligent, I know. And the industry that I've got into really pays that back when you are diligent. I'm not a rocket scientist, and I never was going to be able to have the marks to be a doctor, but I read people pretty well. I'm cautious, I'm very reserved, and I'm pretty quiet. And those attributes, I'm pretty direct. So in terms of communication, you're not going to die wondering what I want, and you're not going to die wondering where we sit, and I'm reasonably open. Those attributes actually work pretty well in a negotiation process, and they work pretty well in an analytical process. I'm not going to be the guy generally. I think my track record shows I haven't really got a dud in there in 20 years of acquisition. You can make a mistake, sure, but if you're diligent, you do it properly, you do your due diligence, and you're prepared to take the time to do it properly, and you're prepared to walk away from an acquisition, your chances of getting one really badly wrong are substantially less. Most investors can't do that because they're making their once-off investment. They don't understand the things they really need to research. So that's probably the skills the qualities that have helped me in this line of business. And they're not all that unique. They're not all that special. They're a bit boring actually, but they really do help this line of business, and they've helped me through my process.
And what about in terms of your biggest weaknesses as you've gone along? What would you say is your biggest weakness, and how have you overcome that as you've progressed?
Oh, my biggest weakness is, to be honest, I can do two things and I just have to keep myself in check. One, I'm really shy. And so it's
Right.
really, really easy for me to make all sorts of excuses for myself as to why I don't do this discussion with you, why I don't put myself out there, why I don't pitch myself to somebody, or why I really need to watch that and keep a close
Yep.
abreast of that. And the other one is I can run down a rabbit hole. It's a strength in that you can focus on something so clearly. And when I'm focused on an acquisition, I'm super focused. But I can run down a rabbit hole. So I can be at work for a day and I can spend that day or week or month or running down a rabbit hole doing things that really aren't that important, because
Yeah.
I think they need to be done perfect. And sometimes I need to pull myself in check and go, hang on, Brian, where are you trying to get to?
Yeah.
What is it you want to achieve? And are these activities you're doing getting you there? Or are you really just, working back into your little comfort zone where
Yeah. Okay.
you're shy and you can work in your office and you don't have to put yourself out there and have to talk to people? So that's been my biggest weakness through the process.
But that sort of has its own. On the flip side of that is it is a strength in some ways, because you also, where we first met many years ago was through martial arts, right?
Yep.
And you run your own karate dojo these days.
Yep, I do, yeah.
And a black belt. Your children are black belts and very well versed in martial arts.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Had some success as well. So there's attributes in that side of things where it's not all the weakness, is it?
No, it's not all the weakness, and that's where the trap falls. That focus and that attention to detail. It's not all a weakness.
Yeah.
But if you find yourself at the end of the month, year, going, well, hang on a minute, I didn't do the big things because I got stuck on these things. You need to keep. I need to keep that in check. And it's the martial arts that we had in common where we first met. It's still an interest today, and I need to make sure that interest doesn't flow into other things. It'd be pretty easy to take that interest and flood that 7 days a week. It's not going to achieve much. You've got to keep that compartmentalization process. Compartmentalizing one's day and one's week and one's year is, however, something I'm really focused on. And other than periods of time where they've been a bit out of control, I think I've managed to do that along the way. But that's I think the biggest weakness. But I'm most aware of.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. What's the best decision that you've made along the way, or even the best investment you've made along the way?
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Well, look, best decision I made was so I've explained about the early stages in the real estate industry. That the full explanation is I'd actually been with a company for about, 7 to 10 years, and I'd risen really quickly. So I really put the hard work in those early years, and I worked really hard, and I'd pretty much risen to the top. And I looked around, and these same two guys that I absolutely idolized, and one of them was almost a pseudo dad to me. I started looking at him, and he's got gout, and he's divorced, and he's not well, and I'm going, whoa. And I'm working for these property syndicators, and they're happy, and they're happy families, and they're making money, and their job is talking to people about investing in something positive. And I've gone, hey, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that I was working with was a Julius Coleman, and he was based in Melbourne. And I just thought, he's the best one. And there were a couple of other blokes around that I was doing some work for as well, but he's the best one. And he was always so effervescent, and he was always on top of his stuff. I thought, I want to work for you. So about 94, I've hounded him. I've hounded him. I'm going to confess, I just hounded the bloke till he gave me a job. And he got hold of him on holidays. We didn't have mobile phones, so I'm sitting and yelling up. I'm going back and forth to the payphone every day to find out whether he's going to give us this job. And he's given us this job. And I've packed up a family of 4, my wife, 3 kids, all under 5. I've got back to Perth. I've resigned. I've headed over to Melbourne in 2 weeks. I've just taken a 12-month contract, and that's probably the best business decision I've made, because I got
Yeah,
over
right.
there. Having arrived, Julius was running a property syndication company. It was reasonable size, but very much in its infancy. He had one right-hand man. That bloke resigned.
Yeah, right.
And so it was Julius, myself, and property manager. That was it. And so I got firsthand to work with one of the foremost blokes. He's just a brilliant man, for 12 months. And I just learned so much. I basically put in my head how I was going to go about this business when I got back to Perth. And we headed back to Perth at the end of that 12 months, not because I wanted to come, but Shelley, my wife, was struggling with the 3 kids, under 5.
Yeah.
You know, it was cold and she was away from family, and she really needed the support and help. So we headed back to Perth, and I headed straight back to Perth and set my own company up. Originally starting as a real estate agency, but, you know, with the full intention to go into property syndication. That was probably the best thing I did. Really, really got a lot out of that. Best acquisition we made. Look, I'm sitting on one at the moment, which I made in 2013. Bulky goods. We bought it for around about 12% return on investment. You know. So I normally aim for an internal rate of return of around about 10 to 12%, depending on the era. And that's a combination of capital and income. So this asset was bought from a receiver. It was big for me, so I just left my former employment. It was the first acquisition we made. It was about $14 million. 13, $14 million thereabouts. You know, that acquisition today is pumping out returns in excess of 15% per annum, and has done so since day one. Has a value of probably 25 mil. So of the, I think we put 6 into it. So the 6 or 7 mil we put into it, you know, we've more than doubled our money. We've had annual rate, annual return of call it 15 to 18% per annum.
Yeah, right.
And probably 30 to 40% of that in the early years was, it's not tax free, but tax deferred because of the depreciation. So that's a great asset. We'll have a relook at that when it comes up in 25, and I'd expect that we'll all keep it. And I got a call a couple of years ago from a girl who had put not a lot of money into it, but her and her husband had put a bit of money into it, and her husband had passed away. She rang me, and it was one of just said, and she said, "Look, this investment's put all of my kids through school."
Yeah, right.
And that sort of thing's so rewarding. That's a really rewarding trust and syndicate to have been involved with. Generally speaking, they're all performing pretty well. One of the very early ones I bought in 2000 was an industrial asset. The very first one I bought, they did phenomenally well for its investors, and I only sold that 2 years ago. And the guys were in there well into their 80s, and it had lived its life and had done its thing for them. But they all experienced returns averaging, I think it was 20% over the journey of the 20 years that they held it for. So that was really rewarding as well. Pretty much I secured the financial retirement of 6 blokes quite comfortably. So that was really rewarding, and you can have those sorts of results. You shouldn't expect them, but you can have them. Just for diligence and time and a little bit of luck, but mainly it's diligence and time. So they're just some of the better ones. Haven't had a real catastrophe yet. But I've seen some of the assets that I purchased from before I left, and I left those assets with the old manager. And I've seen them make some decisions. In property, it's simple, but there are key times you have to make some key decisions, a bit like life, and you've got to get those key decisions right, and the rest of the decisions fall from that. And I've seen some decisions made by people in control of some assets which are probably not well thought through, normally because they don't sit back and just do the common sense test.
Well, what sort of thing, without giving too much away, Brian, what sort of things are those sort of pivotal sort of things?
Yeah, okay. One of the assets was pretty clear it needed to be sold. So a pivotal decision on a property will be, if a single tenant property is there, does that tenant need more space?
Yeah.
Have you kept in touch with them about what their requirements moving forward are? I can remember, and I'll go right back so that won't upset anybody. I can remember having joined Julius, I flew down to Canberra to look at one of the major investments, which was an office building. The agent I'd been speaking with the agent through the month about the asset and about the tenant, and all was good. The lease was expiring in a year or two and everything was fine. And, so I've driven down there, flown to Canberra, gone to see the tenant. The tenant had actually physically left the damn property, was continuing to pay the rent. They're a government tenant, had no requirement for the building moving forward.
Right.
And I was like, it's so crystal clear. And that's an extremity of do the diligence, go and see the asset, keep in touch with the tenant. And, they were moving out as I was going to see them. But your normal key points are things like making sure your lease expiry dates aren't all on the same day. Or maybe if it's a redevelopment potential, making sure they all are on the same period of time.
Yeah, okay.
It'll differ with property, but they're not hard. Who's my end purchaser going to be? Number one. Okay, let's make sure the decisions that we make on this asset leading up to that end purchaser are going to make it attractive to that purchaser, or group of purchasers. They're the sort of key decisions. So each lease expiry is normally a big decision. Subdividing a tenancy might be a big decision. They present themselves through the process, and you just need to stop, consider the world around you before you press the button on, yes, I'm going to extend your lease for 5 years when you've got a syndicate that might expire in 4. Well, how are you going to sell an investment asset with a year left on the lease?
Yeah, right.
These sort of step back decisions, which normally a bit of experience helps with. If you're the 25-year-old trust manager or the 35-year-old trust manager who hasn't worked through cycles, who hasn't seen what happens when a tenant leaves, who doesn't have that real ground level experience, that they cannot fully understand that process. And they're the sort of decisions that they're normally pretty straightforward. But if you look at them and you make the right ones, then everything flows. But you do.
What about mistakes in terms of, from a business perspective, building your business, running your business? What's the biggest mistake or something that you would do differently if you had your time over?
If I had my time over, there was a period of my life, I think you're aware of, where, other things took over and I had no control over that. That happened. So by 35, I was pretty much clear of those, but broke. And 35 to 45, I worked in partnership with others. I should have left earlier. Those years, 40 to 50, were extremely productive years. I was at the top of my game. Still think I'm reasonably close to the top of my game, but then I had that energy, that real drive. Probably should have left 5 years earlier. If I'd left 5 years earlier, there was some really good buying between that first 5-year period, and backed myself a bit more. So I probably persevered too long in situations where I really knew in my heart what I should have done, but took time to move out of them. That's probably the main one. Just to back myself a bit stronger and back myself a bit earlier would be the biggest mistake I've made.
That's part of that diligence part comes into it, and sometimes that makes you act a little slower than what you might have, but also it's helped get you where you've got to as well. So
Is it the end of the world? No, I often look back on my time there and go, look, if you'd said to me that I'm going to earn a really good income, I'm going to build a company, I'm going to do A, B, and C, would I do it again? Yeah. But would I have left 5 years earlier?
Yeah.
So,
and what about people in business, whether it's mentors or whether it's just people in the public eye? Who are the people that you sort of look at and like the way they go about business?
There are, and they're pretty private. So there are a couple of guys over here that I've watched, and don't know whether I should drop a name, but look, there's one in particular, one property syndicator over here who ran a massive business, which was an agricultural business. And I watched him build his property empire and how he went about doing it. I did a fair bit of work for him in the early years. I just had a great deal of time for him. He was able to do a massive amount without a cast of thousands around him.
Yeah, right.
He now owns a substantial amount of Tasmania. He owns in the mall. He owns a substantial amount of Fremantle. He's picked where he's invested. He started out as investing like myself in small amounts in his syndicates, and he now is the largest investor in what he does. I've really admired the way he went about his business. I really admired his directness in his negotiation with people. I've really admired the fact he's kept himself so private. There's another group that I work for it's very rare to work for a group, and I work for a group that don't invest in my syndicates. The reason they don't is because they've just become so damn large they don't have to. And they've actually managed to pass the businesses, I'll call them businesses plural, down through generations. That's really hard. You know, to see a family that come here from Europe, set up a fishing business, build that business to a variety of businesses, build that business to a property empire, pass it down from one set of brothers to the next, to now the third generation. Highly admirable, just
pretty impressive.
Just really impressive stuff. Who else do I follow? So I follow both of those groups pretty closely. I used to follow a group called Prime West because I had a bit of time for the stuff they did. They've now sold out. They are a very, very different beast now, so I probably wouldn't follow them as closely as what I did. But Jim Litters and Chappie Schaefer and that crew, very astute investors, very quality people, knew what they were doing, and have done very well for their investors over a very long period of time. I get a lot of inspiration out of sporting. We've spoken about the karate, but my passion there is really coaching people. It's not necessarily coaching people sport. It's helping them become better people, overcome whatever it is they're facing, and I really enjoy that. So I get a great deal out of those podcasts that you might pick up about Australian rules football, because I'm a bit of an AFL tragic, but also the American coaches and high-level athletes and what motivates them and how they've got to where they've got to. That sort of thing, I can lose myself in quite extensively. And so they're the inspiration in terms of people around me and quotes. And I've learned a lot, not from books, but from watching because of my nature and just taking advice. And if you're willing to talk to an older person who's been successful in whatever area, they're normally very happy to help and very happy to give you some advice. And if that advice is coming from the right place, i.e. the person who's giving the advice genuinely wants the best for you, it's pretty invaluable. And there's some blokes along the way that have really helped me. I mean, when I started Sullivan Property Consultants in 2010, one of the easy things to have done would have been to have pretty much just taken all the old assets that I set up and taken the management of them. And I had an old client, a pharmacist, a really good pharmacist, and he started out as one of my tenants. And he tells a wonderful story about his first meeting with me. I just sat down and said, "Your rent's too low, it needs to increase." He says, "I knew you were pretty honest when you said that, because I knew you were right, but there was no way I was going to pay any more rent." So that was, but he then later became a client. He sat me down and he said, "Look, just leave that be. Don't spend your life looking backwards over your shoulder. Get on, set your business up, look forward and move forward positively, and don't waste any energy over what you've walked away from. Just walk away from it, set it up and go." And I thought, and that's what I did. And
that's really good advice, though, isn't it? Because it's very easy for people to actually look back at what's there in different ways as well. And you often see people get stuck in the past on those sorts of things when there's the whole world is available to you. Everyone out there is potential new client or business or whatever it might be. You don't need to look at all that old stuff. You can move on in a much more positive way. And people often forget that.
Yeah, it was really, really good advice. I followed it to the letter, and I'm so glad I did. And I watched my old partners for probably the next 5 or 6 years, just focused so much on what I was doing and how I was doing, and they really didn't get on with their own business. And
Yes,
I
yeah,
shouldn't be rude to them, but was it was kind of funny in a way.
yeah,
I'd resolved to never go there. Wasn't that I was going to try to. I wish them all the best, and I'm pleased that they've got their act together and are doing well now under new management. It means nothing to. It meant nothing to me then.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was pleased to see them go on and be successful. But my focus became very much my business, what I'm doing, and moving forward, and
Yep.
my new clientele. And that was the best advice I got, and it worked well.
So going forward, what's next for the business and for you?
Oh, look, I'm really excited moving forward. We're in a really good spot. I've got to be honest. The business is well positioned. We've purchased well. The assets we've purchased are providing great returns for the investors. There's two assets that I need to really focus on and concentrate on in the next 6 to 12 months to make sure that we overcome some hurdles, which is those key decision points I was talking to you
Yep.
about. I know what they are. I've got to get them done. They have to be done well. They have to be done right. We want to redevelop a shopping centre. We want to develop a childcare actually on the shopping centre. We want to get a liquor license for the shopping centre. We really want to do these things. They're critical. They need to be done in the next 6 to 12 months. I tick those boxes. I get them done well. I can put that asset not aside, but I know that the big ticket things have been
Yeah,
done and I can then move on. I get those done in this 12-month period leading to 30th of June. Next year, I can then look forward positively to acquiring something in a market I expect to start to see some opportunity. So
yeah,
that's a really big focus for the business. The business is mature now. It's mature. I've got to the stage where well over 50% of the income from the property management side is derived from directly those trusts that I own or have substantial ownership on, and the
yeah,
balance of the database is guys who invest in the trusts, and so it's pretty tight. So on the business front, it's quite exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. On the home front, which leads into it, the kids are all now grown adults. They're all
yeah,
in good jobs. They're all with good partners. So I've got the time clear to do that. On the personal front, I've still got a strong interest in the coaching, but getting
yep,
towards the time where I want to see other people take that over. I want to devote more time to the business and slim down those extracurricular activities that I'm doing.
yeah,
And I'd like to see, and one of the things I'm quite passionate about, one of the reasons I'm talking to you is, I'd like to maybe act as a bit more of a mentor to people.
yeah. Okay.
The young people who want to enter the business. It's a very
Yeah.
different business, a very different world to what it was when we came through, and
Mm.
the environment's a lot different in a lot of ways. It's a lot better, and I think that given the breadth of experience that I've had, both personally and on a business front, I can probably help somebody,
Yeah.
probably add to their business, and it's not going to detract from mine. And that's where I'd like to head. That's what I'd like to see. That's what I like to do. I like to. I'm certainly not looking at reducing my business activities. If anything, I'll increase those
Yeah.
and reduce some of the coaching time and the other time.
Yeah.
Spend a bit more time with family and locally, and get out in the boat a bit on the home front is the quid pro quo. So really excited about the next 10 years. I'm well, I'm healthy, I'm motivated. Life's good.
Well, that's good stuff, Brian. Thanks very much for joining us on the show. It was really good to hear your insights, and good luck with the next few years.
Pleasure, Dion. And the one thing I will say is I've really watched I should have mentioned that you're actually one of the guys I've watched closely over the years since we first met. I really admire the stuff that you've done. I love the way you go about it.
Thanks, Brian.
I've enjoyed the blog, and I've really enjoyed the podcast. So
Yeah.
I know that I'm probably a little bit different from the suite of people you've had on previous, but I wish you all the best with it. I'm sure you'll be successful with it, and I just love what you're doing. So
I appreciate
congratulations.
that. That's really nice of you to say. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.